Welcome to another edition of Hi Events. We are here today at the Buddhist Cultural Center here in Colombo for a very special occasion organized by the Royal Thai Embassy in association with a Dialog initiative. We are here today for a special seminar on the Thailand-Sri Lanka Buddhist diplomacy. What makes today's seminar very special is that we will also witness the launch of the book by Dr. George Cook, which is Buddhist Diplomacy, Sri Lanka-Thailand Relations. Ladies and gentlemen, this is indeed a very special seminar as it will mark yet another historical day in the calendars of both Sri Lanka and Thailand. You do not want to miss this. I am your host, Amanda Ramos, and please join us.
Warm welcome for the seminar on Thailand-Sri Lanka Buddhist diplomacy, organized by the Royal Thai Embassy in association with a Dialog initiative.
I am greatly honored and humbled at the same time to be among most prominent Sri Lankan and Thai scholars today on Buddhism and international relations. Today, we have an impressive lineup of speakers and panelists who will share their thoughts with you as well as knowledge on the relations between Sri Lanka and Thailand, which date back more than 7 centuries ago.
I would like to congratulate Dr. George for his latest achievement, the publication on the Buddhist diplomacy, the Sri Lanka-Thailand relations, which would serve to enhance our knowledge of this area, which is not much familiar with majority of us. What happened from the Thai Upasampada to Sri Lankan Buddhism is it gave legitimacy for the effort made by Venerable Saranankara. Venerable Saranankara was working in a difficult situation where there was no proper education and proper monastic education both. Secular education and religious education both were at loss. But his effort, since his initiation as a young monk at the age of 16, he contributed a lot to revive the Buddhist education. He helped the Buddhist community to gain their cultural consciousness. That is my basic argument or my basic perception about when I am going to praise the role of Venerable Upali and Upasampada in the Sri Lankan context. Let me start my brief account on modern survival of Buddhism and contribution of Thailand to the cause. When we discuss the modern revival of Buddhism in Sri Lanka, the higher ordination, Upasampada, brought from Thailand in the mid of the 18th century, turns out to be the impetus unquestionable. In the context of proper functioning of Buddhist society, the role of Buddhist monk is foremost. Even though the 4 Parishad retinues of the order are equally important as to the Sri Lankan society, the role played by the Bhikkhu Sangha is most outstanding.
Buddhist relationship between Sri Lanka and Thailand can trace from Anuradhapura period. But for today, my topic is monastic correspondence between Thailand and Sri Lanka in 19th century. According to the documents The last group of Thai delegation who traveled to Sri Lanka was Phra Visuddhacharya of Ayutthaya Kingdom. From then, Thailand had to confront with Myanmar for 2 decades. Therefore, no more news of Sinhalese monks in Thai society. In 1809 Christian century, Christian era, a Sinhalese monk named Vaditara Bhikkhu and 2 Samaneras named Ratana Samanera and Hitaya Samanera arrived to Bangkok for paying homage to pilgrimage site and need to learn about religion situation in Kingdom of Thailand. In 1814 Christian era, a Sinhalese monk named Sasanavangsa Bhikkhu traveled to Thailand with 2 Buddha relics and Bodhi sampling. King Rama II ordered the royal court to fetch him to Bangkok with magnificent procession. He enshrined the Buddha relics in stupa at the temple of the eminent Buddha and ordered to plant Bodhi sampling at Vasutat Thepavararam. Sasanavangsa Bhikkhu pretended as the representative of Sankaraja of Sri Lanka at that time. So, King Rama II provided him with accommodation at Wat Mahadhatu, the abode of Sankaraja, and financial support monthly. Having discussed with Sasanavangsa Bhikkhu, King Rama II need to send mission to Sri Lanka to learn more about Buddhist situation.
It is indeed a pleasure and a privilege to introduce and review this research monograph on Buddhist diplomacy, Sri Lanka-Thailand relations by George Cook. Let me briefly say something about the author too, since I have known the author for a long time. In fact, maybe half of my career I have known George Cook. First, as a student in the Department of International Relations, while he was reading for his master's in arts in international relations, as a young career diplomat of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Sri Lanka. His thirst for knowledge on Sri Lanka's diplomacy, international relations was clearly visible even during that time as a student of the postgraduate class. In the subsequent years, he has presented many research papers at local and international conferences and gained expertise on Sri Lanka's international relations. Since he has become somewhat an expert on South and Southeast Asia, I have invited many times as a presenter whenever we had seminars on South or Southeast Asian regions and the nations of those regions. Many years later, he expressed his interest in reading for the degree of Doctor of Philosophy. When he registered for his doctoral studies at the University of Colombo, I willingly came forward as a co-supervisor because I knew he would do an excellent research to disseminate new knowledge in international relations of Sri Lanka.
We will now be launching a special publication on Buddhist diplomacy by George I.H. Cook. I warmly invite Dr. George Cook to present these books to our distinguished guests.
The Venerable Fokana and the Venerable Vadinagalathera explained to us the significance of Buddhism, the connectivity between Sri Lanka and Thailand. We would now like to have a short discussion with two senior eminent personalities. I would like to invite them on stage shortly, who will focus on two different aspects of Buddhist diplomacy. And this is where we are going to look at the international relations perspective and what it does for IR, and on the other hand, the whole process of research and what it actually means.
I would like to ask the panelists to recommend or to give us some certain recommendation in not really desensitized, but makes it a kind of normal to employ a certain level religions as a soft power in conducting diplomacy.
If you look at John Paul Lederach and others who look at peace, and they look at it from their religious perspective, and they implement all their policies, this is not state diplomacy, but individuals who are international peacemakers, they use that religious lens in implementing, and through that, their religion is also given credibility as a vehicle for peace. So in that sense also, religion is of course linked to conflicts these days. But you have to look at the flip side also. It brings peace, and recognition of that religion as a peace giver is very impactful. I think that way, it's not a country per se, but it's the religion.
The religion was one of the most important and most affected item or the valuable phenomena. One could really get into each other. And also, especially with Buddhism, because people always have love, peace, and all Maitri and everything. So because of that, people tend to go along with that, because it always gave them some peace in mind.
So I guess that's where, even at the Paramananda temple in Galle, there are letters written by the Thai king himself. Now, the Thai king is a highly revered individual in the country. At that time, in the world, he was recognized as the Buddhist king. Even the British respected him as the Buddhist king. When they found Kapilavastu relics, it was handed over to the Thai king to distribute. Now, such a personality taking the trouble to write to individual monks in Sri Lanka, however senior they may have been, you would think it would be leader to leader, in keeping with state understanding there. But that is where we see an interest being taken to support. That is an aspect that comes into mind at that point.
We'd like to ask you something that is very special, and that is, of course, we know Sri Lanka and Thailand consider heritage to be something of very great importance, whether it comes to culture, whether it comes to the food, and we really celebrate our heritage. So we'd like to ask you, sir, what are your thoughts in terms of the relationship that Sri Lanka and Thailand share in terms of culture and heritage?
Thank you very much for your question. Indeed, Thailand and Sri Lanka has been a long time tasted friend. We have a chance, of course, as mentioned during the seminar, the exchange of Buddhism. First, many centuries ago, the Lankan Buddhists came over to propagate Buddhism, Theravada Buddhism in Siam, in Thailand back then. Even before some of the main capitals in Thailand were founded, we have archaeological site supposedly to be from Sri Lanka. We have the link about that. And after cities, we have traced of Buddhism relation between Lanka and Siam and Thailand. And just mentioned during the presentation, about 270 years ago, Upali Thero came over to Sri Lanka to revive great Upasampada, the high ordinations. I think that is very significant that both countries share common heritage. Of course, first Buddhism came from Sri Lanka to Thailand, and then it was Siam and Thailand who came back to Sri Lanka to revive Buddhism. So this is very important to our two countries. Apart from that, our people share the same things that are sharing: love of food, love of fun, kind people. One of the most hospitable people in the world, Thai people and Sri Lankan people. So that's why I think that is important. We take a look at the modern days when Sri Lanka is in difficult situation. Thailand, as a friend of Sri Lanka, also contribute to help. Of course, Sri Lanka is in difficult situation like almost the rest of the world. But in this, we are friends, we are ready to help. And as I mentioned earlier, it's a long-time test friends. And we will continue to be friends to each other in years ahead, in the future, in many years to come.
We're here with the man himself behind today's successful launch and seminar, and that is of course the author of today's publication, which is The Buddhist Diplomacy, Sri Lanka and Thailand Relations, the man himself, like I said before, Dr. George Cook. Very good evening to you, sir.
Good evening. Thank you so much.
Well, it was indeed a very insightful session, and all of our viewers as well are intrigued to know what are your thoughts behind such a wonderful publication, what were your initial ideas, and if you can give us a little bit more so that the viewers can be ready to read it.
So the idea for this book came up in 2017. This was shortly after the passing of the then Thai king, Bhumibol Adulyadej. And Thailand is a country that has supported Sri Lanka on numerous occasions. We share very close connectivity. We have for a very long time. We are countries which mark anniversaries after independence when you talk about diplomacy. But if you go deep into the past, you're going back hundreds of years, centuries of connectivity, support, cooperation that has taken place, that has enriched both of our countries. It's not just a one-way street. For example, Sri Lanka first offered Upasampada to Thailand when it was known as Siam, hundreds of years ago. You come to the 1700s and you have it coming from Thailand to Sri Lanka. So there has been a lot of collaboration taking place, and this really inspired me to focus on this. A lot of researchers in the past, historians like Dr. Lorna Devaraja and so many others, have done a lot of research into these areas up to about the 1970s when we've talked about and focused on it. Unfortunately, today we're in the 21st century. We don't reflect enough. We don't focus much on the past, and so that's what inspired me to do it.
It's wonderful to have you here, and we heard some very wonderful insights from you today at the panel discussion. We'd like to question you a little bit more about the importance of such an important topic for research. What are your thoughts here, and what is the hidden mystery that we have found behind this topic?
Well, first and foremost, having a book of this nature, focusing on Buddhist diplomacy, which is not often looked at, and linking it with a country that Sri Lanka has had strong ties to. This is very integral and very important. It's an incredible contribution to our understanding of Sri Lankan relations with other countries, but also how, if you look at the annexures, how these relations were continued and kept. The fact that the mystery, and the fact it's not really a mystery as such, but the fact that you could get the old correspondence, and they were placed in temples and in the archives and in different places, and to get those dispersed data and to gather it together and come up with this, I really commend Dr. George Cook for his contribution.
Thank you very much, Professor. And any ideas or any comments you want to give to the readers of this publication?
I had the pleasure of reading it, and it flows beautifully, and it is meant for the layman as well as for anyone who's interested, but also scholars. So it bridges the the divide between scholarly writing and writing for pleasure. And there's a depth of knowledge in that, but it's presented so clearly that it's very interesting.
What a wonderful and successful launch as well as seminar it has been. Wonderful insights were shared and history was definitely made. Thank you very much for joining us for today's edition. We hope to see you soon. I'm your host, Amanda Ramos, signing out.